Okay. So again, welcome to everybody to this web seminar organized by the Italian Association of the Friends of the Hebrew University and by the Italy-Israel Association in Milan. I asked Professor Elisa Bianchi, she is the president of the Association of the Friends of the Hebrew University, to take the microphone, to unmute her microphone. I should give you the...
Yes, I did.
Okay, perfect. And to give her greetings to the web.
Good evening, everyone. Just a word. Thank you for joining us. The Italian Friends of Hebrew University are delighted to have Professor Zohar Kampf, Dean of Students, Professor Daniel Sobelman, and Direttore Maurizio Molinari online. They will speaking to us about the ongoing war and the university problems. Thanks again. Passo la parola al moderatore Marco Paganoni.
Thank you very much, Elisa. Well, since we have quite a few people connected from Israel, besides our speakers, before we start, let me express in these times our sympathy and our sense of closeness to our Israeli friends who are still under the threats of the missiles and so on. And we hope that at least for the next couple of hours, they will we won't have to run to a shelter. We are very pleased to have in this web seminar some of the most outstanding speakers on the topic that we choose. As Elisa introduced, Daniel Sobelman is Professor of International Relations at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and one of the main experts on the Israel-Iran relationship and conflict, unfortunately. And Maurizio Molinari, who is well known by the Italian public, is editorialist, essayist, and expert in geopolitics. Last but not least, Maurizio is a former student of the Hebrew University. Those wishing to ask questions are kindly invited to post them in the chat, in the writing. At the end of the speeches, we will select 3 or 4 questions, and the speaker will give their answers and conclusions. Of course, I beg you to keep your questions short, relevant, and on the point. But before giving the floor to our outstanding speakers, let me introduce Professor Zohar Kampf, who is the Dean of Students at the Hebrew University and will give us a briefing about how the Hebrew University is dealing with this current so hard situation. Please, Zohar, unmute your mic if you can. Are you?
Yes, I'm ready. I'm sharing my presentation. Can you see it?
Okay. So go ahead and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marco, for inviting me for this lovely evening. It is a pleasure for me to be here and to present you some of the challenges the Hebrew University management facing today in this ongoing crisis. I was asked to share our experience, how it feels to be an Israeli scholar, an Israeli student right now these days. And I will share some insights with you because we are, this is how would I title it? I think a disruption would be a good title. If you think about it, since 2000, it was all over the world in 2000, the pandemic in 2000, but Since 2000, the Hebrew University is in ongoing crisis. First the COVID, then October 7, then the first round of violence with Iran, and now the current round of violence. And my personal story, by the way, which is not the focus here, but I think it explains the disruption I'm talking about. I was a scholar at the Department of Communication, cooperating with the friends of Daniel Sobelman from the Department of International Relations, doing a wonderful research. I enjoyed so much of my research. And then came October 7, and I felt, and this is, I think, probably the most difficult thing to feel for an academic. I felt that there is no purpose. There is no purpose in my work. There's no meaning. And this is a really tragic situation. And I decided to take on the position of Dean of Students in order to compensate something in the big hole that I felt inside. And I transformed my identity from a scholar, from full professor, getting, to all conferences, publishing papers and books, to administration. I'm doing right now administration, but this administration fills me with meaning. And this is probably the most important thing. And I'm going to share with you right now the meaning that I'm feeling right now as the Dean of Students. So October 7 came for all of us as a surprise. We had so many students that injured, even kidnapped, and others. So many students became displaced after October 7, and this ongoing crisis from October 7 still accompanying us, and we feel it every day. Even now in the Iran war, the Hamas is still a very dominant, I think right now, still the October 7 scar. And we had 2 rounds of violence with Iran. Here, what I'm sharing with you, little souvenirs from the Iranians that we found in our campus, in 2 of our campus in Jerusalem. The one on the left is found near my office in Mount Scopus, like 25 meters from my own office. And you can see other souvenirs from the botanical garden and from other places. And these are sharpnels from missiles and inceptors that we will find it to think about the experience of walking and find all kind of things like that on the way. And adding to this complexity is the fact or the claim, as I'm making it, that Mount Scopus is probably the most ideologically complex campus in the world. And before, and these are images from the May events, Nakba on the one hand, Independence Day on the one hand, on the other. And this is the kind of tension that we feel like on everyday basis until October 7, I would say. And I would say that after October 7, there is a little repress. I think all the ideological and political disagreements, they are there, of course, but they are underneath. And right now, and I believe that we'll come back and in a storm after all these rounds of violence will be over. But for now, it is still repressed. So if I compare how we cope, or if I compare the challenges of COVID to the challenges of war, COVID seems like a children game today. I would say even writing this, thinking about presentation, I think I miss those good old days of COVID when distant learning was done from the sofa at home when all the family around us. Today, distant learning is a very different way. By the way, we did not experience seriously this distant learning, but I already see the issues and problems. The problems is that studying in the shelter, not always with Wi-Fi connection, and running several times to the shelter during a lesson, it is a problem. Or getting into the lesson after nights without sleeping, especially if you have babies and little kids at home, this is an issue. So I see a big issue here, and another comparison who are students in the COVID, all students were there from afar, but there at home. Now students are not available. Right now, the Hebrew University 1,600 students reservists. This is not the greatest number that we had. In October 23, we had 5,000 reservists. So 1,600 reservists, it is still a big number, and it is very challenging to start a semester without these students. Add to these students 900 students that live on the northern front line, and I'm not talking about Haifa. I'm talking about the borderline, the front line near Lebanon, and they are there suffering from like everyday experience of war. We have 3,000 students right now treated in our accessibility and learning disability units. Many of them are suffer from injuries, those that we can see and those that we cannot, from the war. And of course, we have hundreds, if not thousands, I don't have the exact numbers, of students with little children. Think about learning and think about teaching at this situation. I can share more about our experience at the end of this semester when it will be over, because right now I really hope that the structure that we are now constructing at the Hebrew University to cope with the challenges will hold, and learning will be done. So how did we respond to crisis? And I will do it very briefly. I don't want to take the time from Daniel and Maurizio. So Hebrew University is responding academically, financially, and psychologically to this crisis. Let me be very brief here. So let's start with the accessibility unit, because this is a real issue right now. We have many students right now that were soldiers in the last 2-3 years, and the numbers are rising, and they have all kinds of issues and accessibility issues, and see the rise. We are talking about a 33% rise in the number of students that recognized with harsh disabilities, mental and physical. And this is had to them, those students with coming with learning disabilities, and their disabilities are worsened during the war. And we are trying to cope with this issue by hours of tutoring. Tens of thousands of hours of tutoring were delivered in the last 2 or 3 years. The psychological service, we are subsidizing therapy sessions for all reservists at the Hebrew University. And this is still not enough. We have about 12,000 hours of subsidized therapy. We're doing workshops, the one-on-one on mental well-being, but it seems that this is a well-structured response to the issue, but definitely the waiting list for the psychological service is very long. And of course, the tense relation at the Hebrew University. I can share with you, not now, unfortunately, many instances of intervention that we've made between Jewish and Muslim students at the Hebrew University, with the war at the background, with students, we have Palestinian students that some of their families were killed during the war in Gaza. I know one of them personally, lost 31 of his family members. Think about these students sitting side by side with soldiers that fighting in Gaza. So this situation, I'm not delving in this situation, but if you think about it, it is way possible that these two students' families, are connected in a very tragic link to one another. Um, so this is the kind of issues that we are dealing with. And right now, all the heads of the units under the Dean of Students unit tell me that tsunami is coming after the war. When the war will be over, a tsunami will coming, a tsunami of difficulties, challenges, of students that lost, of young people who lost at least 3 years of their life, and now sometimes lost more than that. And now they need some attention from us. And this is why we are preparing ourselves, in addition to the crisis intervention centers and internet-based anxiety treatment that we are now developing. We have special programs for war-injured individuals, helping them to cope and to cope with the day after the war, and programs for integrating individuals with disabilities into research laboratories to allow them to exhaust all their potential when coming to the Hebrew University. So this is in a nutshell the things that we are going through right now, and the things that we are trying to do in order to cope with the situation. Thank you very much for listening. This is much appreciated. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you so much to you, Zohar. Your, as friends of Israel and friends of the Hebrew University, your brief but really in-depth talk is worrying, and I think that it gave us a perfect idea of the situation, of this almost a strange situation to have these youngster Arab and Jews so close in the same classroom and then at war each other. Thank you again. And now, Daniel, I ask you to unmute your microphone and to take the floor. I don't know how is going on the translation, automatic translation. As I told you, it's the first time that we are using this device, and so it's almost a test. But I ask you, if possible, to speak a little slowly, as there is a human translator, simultaneous translator working. So it's up to you. We are looking forward to hearing your speech. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me. Thanks for everybody, the Italian Friends of the Hebrew University, for organizing this. Let me just say, the Hebrew University is an Israeli asset, but the way I see it, it is not solely an Israeli university. It belongs to the Italian Friends. It belongs to the American Friends of the Hebrew University. It belongs to, in my view, it belongs to the entire, I would say, Jewish community all over the world. It is at a minimum, it is a co-production. It's a production of Israel and everyone who supports the university. I am a true believer in the idea of like any support or any investment in anything that has to do with Israel. And what makes Israel what it is an investment in yourself. If you are an American investing in an American Jew investing in the Hebrew University, or Italian Jew investing in the Hebrew University, or in the state of Israel, you are investing in your own, I would say, security guarantee, your insurance policy. And I say this partly as someone who's in recent years been involved in a lot of American Friends activities, and it was an amazing revelation for me to see firsthand the way in which friends of the Hebrew University from all over the world are involved in sometimes in a very intimate way in what is going on at this university. So thank you for that. And I also say that as I guess, an international relations scholar who sees the world as a place where you want to be not a humanitarian factor, but a strategic factor. And the Hebrew University, among other places in Israel, is what helps turn the state of Israel into a meaningful, into a robust, into a smart, successful, strategic factor. Now, let me just say, I'll say a few words about my view of the situation right now in the Middle East and moving forward, and then, of course, leave time for questions and answers, hopefully. I'll start by saying that these are obviously very volatile and uncertain times, and we're clearly in the midst of the most dramatic, tectonic Middle East war since at least the 1973 Yom Kippur War. And it's obvious that the implications of the current Middle Eastern war are going to be far-reaching and formative, and really the only question is in what way. And that's the million-dollar question. I would say that in general, you find that many people, whether they're laymen, journalists, analysts, scholars, they perceive the war through the prism of their political views of Israel, or the political views of the United States, or their views of Netanyahu or Trump, or their views about history and imperialism, colonialism, etc. And they view the war's very justification, its strategic merit, its rationale, its legality, and its progress through certain prisms. Now, this approach with which you come to the table will often determine if you decide to focus on the glass half empty or the glass half full. And at the moment, the glass seems like it has a little bit of both. And I think this is our challenge as scholars, as analysts, who are really expected to kind of somehow be above the fray and try to provide context into a situation which involves a lot of noise and a lot of distractions. Many of them are political distractions. That's our challenge, to see through that noise, of which there is a great deal right now. This war, whichever way it ends, is not going to have a clear-cut binary outcome. When it's over, it's not going to be black or white. We will most likely be debating and arguing about this war for many years to come. And again, whichever way the war physically ends, all parties, meaning Israel, Iran, the United States, the Gulf states, etc., are going to do their best to market their achievements and manipulate the other players' beliefs and perceptions about what happened in this war, and about what the future implications of this war are going to be in terms of the balance of power in the Middle East, etc. In general, I will say that since the Hamas attack on October 7th, which was obviously the worst catastrophe that has happened to Israel in its history, and as many people characterize it in Israel as a one-day Holocaust. Because yes, Israel with nuclear bombs and cyber and high tech and all that stuff, but for an entire day, the state of Israel, it was nowhere to be found. If you were living in one of the kibbutzim around the Gaza Strip and you had Hamas like militants, terrorists in your kitchen, and you were calling the police, no one came. So this, I would say, accounts for a lot of what we're saying. So basically, there are three traumas that are motivating and shaping Israel's behavior since October 7th. Obviously, the first trauma is what happened on October 7th. The second trauma is the realization that October 7th was nothing compared to what it could have been. It could have easily been 10 times worse, um, on the border of almost existential. Um, and the third trauma is a retrospective trauma that goes back to the way in which Israel now, on October 7th, a lot of people all of a sudden realized that, wait, Hamas wasn't deterred. We thought Hamas was being deterred by Israel. What happened later was that once October 7th happened, was that people realized that not only was Hamas not being deterred, Israel was deterred. So these three traumas are really shaping what Israel is trying to achieve, which is never to go back to a situation where you have an enemy on your borders, because I'm sure many of you have been to Israel, and Israel is a country without any strategic depth whatsoever. Nothing. No strategic depth. The distance between the Gaza Strip, between Hamas and the Gaza Strip and the kibbutzim is just a 2-minute walk. And what Israel has been trying to do is really reshape its entire strategic environment in the Middle East and make sure that nothing like this could ever happen again. And it has been attempting over the past 2.5 years to basically render all of its enemies, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or now the Iranians, basically to eliminate them as strategic factors and empty them from their strategic clout. Now, this is understandable and it's natural given the trauma that happened to Israel. And given what we know now, that these actors, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah and the Iranians, literally we have the intelligence, we have the documents, we have everything. They were planning because they were planning, they thought that they would be in a position to destroy Israel. So this is one thing that is really animating Israel's behavior. Now, I don't think that this is realistic, that eliminating your entire strategic environment and turning the Iranians. Iran is a nation of 92 million people. It's a huge country. And it is, a lot of thousands of very skilled and professional engineers, etc. I think it's unrealistic to just cancel that country as a strategic factor. Now, on the upside, I will say, obviously, I sympathize deeply with everything that Professor Zoll just said. This is a reality. Um, but I think there's also let's put it this way, the silver lining that we are discovering over the past 2.5 years is that Israel, nonetheless, this is the upside, is Israel is uh, a world-class power or actor in terms of like military sophistication, intelligence, high tech, etc. Israel and the United States have demonstrated phenomenal aerial and intelligence prowess over the past, just look at the past several weeks. And I think that a lot of countries, whether they like Israel or not, are going to be interested in our technologies. They're going to be interested in Iron Dome, and they're going to be interested in the multi-layer defense system. They're going to be interested in ways of dealing with, unmanned precision-guided aerial vehicles, drones. Israel's defense industries are probably going to make a massive windfall of investments and money and purchases out of what is going on right now, because they are really the it doesn't get better or in terms of like sophistication um and capacity. Also on the upside, I would say that Israel's society is showing very impressive resilience. Like the restaurants now, if you ask people, restaurants are full. People are going about their daily life, their traffic jams, right? And Israel's currency, the shekel, is very strong. And you still need to be pretty wealthy, even a millionaire, just to afford an apartment in places like Tel Aviv or some places in Jerusalem. right? So someone still like the markets, someone still believes in us. If a company like, Nvidia is opening shop in Israel and recruiting thousands of workers and engineers, someone still has a lot of confidence in the startup nation, let's put it that way. Also on the upside, I would say that Israel since October 7th, our entire strategic environment has shifted. It's changed completely. Israel's enemies have either been, think of the case of the Syrians, of Bashar al-Assad, who's like basically been eliminated. Hezbollah has been very, very weakened. Hamas has been weakened, substantially weakened. Israel is no longer deterred by anyone. And it should be in a much better position right now to prevent the repetition of another October 7th ever again. The axis of resistance, about which I wrote of research in recent years, and I wrote a book about the evolution of the Iran-led axis of resistance in the region that included Hezbollah and the Houthis and the Iraqi militias, etc. It's nothing compared to what it was in the years that preceded October 7th. So it's far less threatening to Israel than it was. Still, I would say that we still always need to remember the conceptual reality is that military achievements, if they are not cemented in diplomatic arrangements, of diplomatic agreements, they could be surprisingly temporary and fleeting. And I study asymmetrical conflicts in history. You see that weaker actors, sometimes the asymmetry can be vast, but weaker actors can recover more quickly than we imagine. So that's something to always bring into consideration. In this respect, I would say that my biggest critique is of Israel over the past 2.5 years is that it has had all the series of unbelievable, phenomenal tactical military achievements, but like nothing is enough. It's never enough, and it has basically refused to cash in on those achievements and turn these achievements or generate a lasting or relatively lasting strategic reality. And that's why this war has really morphed into like October 7th, really morphed into this what feels like a never-ending war. Now, specifically regarding the current state of play between Israel, the United States, and Iran, I think that the most important development that has happened in this war took place around about 2 weeks ago, and that was when the war turned from an all-out war, whose planners, right, basically Netanyahu and Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, they had hoped that war would topple the Iranian regime. And it has, in the meantime, the war has turned into something that is more akin to mutual deterrence. So it's now being fought over the rules of the game, the acceptable rules of the game by which the actors are allowed to pursue the war. And so it's being fought on a relatively more level playing field. The Iranians have managed to like somehow level the playing field. And how have they managed to do this? Because Israel and the United States are far less vulnerable to Iran because of distance, because of technology, because of military capacity. Israel is far less vulnerable to Iran than, say, Qatar or the UAE or basically Saudi Arabia or the Gulf states. So what Iran has done, it has pursued a strategy of like triangular, what I call triangular um, coercion or triangular deterrence, whereas Israel is relatively resilient, but the Gulf states are near Iran and they're a lot more vulnerable. So that's why Iran is what has been basically doing is imposing severe costs on its immediate neighborhood, on the Gulf states. And it's the Gulf states that are putting pressure on the United States and then on Israel to remain below certain red lines, below certain thresholds of use of force and escalation. That is a pretty significant achievement that the Iranians have managed to accomplish over the past couple of weeks. So everything that you're now seeing, Iran itself is following in the conceptual footsteps of the Hezbollah model. If you remember the 2006 war, Iran is, albeit on a much greater scale, what Iran is trying to do is first survive as a military, as a political regime. And in the meantime, what it is doing, because if it survives in asymmetrical conflicts, if the Iranians, you can imagine that if they survive, yes, they're being pummeled and they're paying the costs that they're paying are dramatic. But if they just survive, stand on their feet after this war that was waged against them by Israel, a regional power, and then the United States, a superpower, if they survive this, then this will reflect on their, I would say, their strategic market value. Like everybody will know that they had survived this war. And also introduced red lines and also obviously imposed costs, pretty dramatic costs in terms of like global financial, economic, energy markets, etc. It has introduced what it calls deterrence equations. That's a term that it borrowed from Hezbollah, right? And what it's trying to do, literally today, but like over the past 2 weeks, is every time Israel and the United States target a certain standard or reach a certain standard of escalation, whether it's factories, power plants, universities, etc., then they will try to exact a symmetrical cost on Israel or the United States. So, for instance, now they are threatening to target Israeli universities, to deliberately target Israeli universities because Israel targeted Iranian universities. They're just forgetting to mention the fact that the reason Israel targeted those universities is that because they basically belong to the IRGC and they are involved in making chemical weapons and stuff like that, which the Hebrew University does not do, right? So the principle that there are at least portraying is this symmetry, that there's rules of the game and symmetry. Now, um, I think that unless we are in for some dramatic surprise, right? So President Trump is now supposedly, according to what he announced, but I mean, you never know now because there's so much, um, there's so much uncertainty in the air, and it's hard to believe what anyone says. But if we are to believe what he said earlier today, then the United States is in direct contact with an alternative government in Iran. Now, if that happened, it would be dramatic. It would be a huge success. But we don't know that's actually what's going to happen. So, in the, let's say, the worst case scenario where Iran, there is a ceasefire. If Iran stands on its feet, yes, it's bruised, like almost every bone in its body is broken. But if it survived, then not only will it have survived, but also demonstrated that it can hold Bahrain and Qatar and the global markets at threat. And this is something that all of us, all actors, will have to bring into consideration next time around, because Iran will harness this in the service of deterring another war, another use of force against this. Um, the last thing I would say is that this war also is a demonstration of how the accuracy revolution, right? You see, you're talking about precision guided drones or missiles that 30 years ago you literally needed to be the United States. You needed to be a superpower in order to have these capabilities. To fire a drone that isn't that expensive at all, with using GPS guidance and hit with precision guidance, with utmost precision, you can hit strategic assets 1,500 kilometers away or 2,000 kilometers away. So now Iran and many other actors have that capacity. And this is something that we are now seeing a demonstration of. So the world is going to, move in the direction of dealing with those, I would say, the democratization of these technologies. Because since the invention of the smartphone, which wasn't that long ago, we all have in our in our pockets technologies that until very recently you had to be a state, even a superpower in order to have. So this is something that's going to inflict, the global economy. This is a fact that we're all going to need to deal with after the war. But really, I'll only end with, and so that we leave time for both Maurizio and the questions, with the fact that the most important thing, and we should never lose sight of this in any war, is that no matter the military achievements, which in this case are incredible, really the only purpose of war is to establish a new order, a new functioning way of conducting international relations in your strategic environment. And right now, unless we want, which we don't, unless we want to find ourselves in another conflict in a year's time or in a few months' time, or even a few years' time, then the most important thing is to shape up a realistic um, regional order in the Middle East. Um, and that I'll end with this, and looking forward to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel, really. And now, Maurizio, I think that we have a lot of things to think about and to speak about. So now we are looking forward to hearing your speech. You unmute, okay.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you to Daniel Sobelman for his very interesting, refreshing, and full of important insights addressed to all of us. And of course, it will be a pleasure to have a conversation all together. And of course, thanks to the address at the beginning that we had about the situation inside the university, what was just said, I believe helped us to understand better the importance of the Hebrew University as a threshold university, not for Israel or for the Middle East, but for all of us, independently from where we live in. Now, trying to build on what Daniel Sobelman told us, basically, we are facing a war in the Middle East that has two different dimensions, a regional one and a global one. Why do we have a global dimension? We have a global dimension because what President Putin, President Trump, and President Xi have in common is that they want to change the world order. They don't believe that the international security order that came out from the Cold War is in their interest. Basically, Putin and Xi started trying to change the world order in 2014, 2013. That's 2013 was the speech on the new Silk Road. 2014 was the Russia decision to annex Crimea. So they started in that moment. The US was trying to defend the previous order. But when Trump was back in the White House, decided that the time of defense was not helping the democracies, the West, or how we want to call it. Basically, they were winning. Who was on the offense? Russia and China was winning. And so President Trump said, you know what? I will change it too. From that point on, as the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz told at the beginning of the Security Conference in Munich, we are living in uncharted waters. We are in a situation where the previous international order does not exist anymore, simply because if the three major powers are not respecting it, so it doesn't stand anymore. But we don't have a new order. So we are facing three different scenarios. We may be heading to an open war among these three different superpowers. These three superpowers, they may agree to a new Yalta to define their own sphere of influence, or we can keep living in this situation of permanent conflict, basically everywhere on everything. This transition period may last 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, who knows? But there is no question that all the conflicts that we are watching in different areas of the world, not only military conflicts, not only in Middle East, in Ukraine, or the potential crisis in Taiwan, or in Venezuela, or in Cuba, but also conflicts on raw materials, on new navigation routes, on the space, on technologies, artificial intelligence, every single ground, geoeconomical or geopolitical, has to do with this fight. Now, this is the frame. In this frame, the war that is happening in Middle East, it shows how much this fight is raging, how much the three superpowers are fighting for the Middle East, for completely different ideas or projects or ambitions that they have in mind, and how all this is interacting with the regional war that basically is between Israel and Iran and started on October 7. Now, what are the three different interests of the superpowers? China wants to build a new Silk Road. To have this new Silk Road, the only way to do it is through the Middle East. We know that there is a land route and a sea route. Both of them are going through the Middle East. Iran is a crucial tassel and piece of this mosaic for China. So basically, without the Middle East and without Iran, there is no new Silk Road. For the US, the Abraham Accord have always been, since 2020, the answer to the Silk Road. So the idea to create in the Middle East a different dynamic, a geoeconomical area between India and the West, to put India in the position of China in terms of granting and giving to the West goods and services. So it is basically the U.S. answer to the new Silk Road, to have its own infrastructure, geoeconomical infrastructure, where the pillars are India, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Western Europe. And then you have Russia. Russia needs the Middle East because if you look at the map and you see how short is the way from the Persian Gulf to the Arctic Sea, if you build a speed railroad from Bandar Abbas to Moscow to the Arctic, it could be the shortest way to reach the Arctic from the Indian Ocean. And this could be done only by the Russians, thanks to their agreement with the Iranians. So also, Russia has in mind to build, thanks to Iran, thanks to the Middle East, an alternative, his own alternative, to rule the redefinition of the world trade. That means the world power. Now, what happens on October 7? October 7, a regional dimension of the Middle East conflict, that is Hamas hating Israel and wanting to destroy Israel, is doing this huge pogrom, killing a lot of Israelis, basically helping the strategy of Iran, this dream to strangle with a circle of fire the state of Israel, and putting on the spot the American project, that is the Abrams Accord, trying to destroy this project. Indirectly, the Iranian strategy in that moment was helping Russia and China to advance their own strategies, their own project, their own ideas on the new Middle East. What happened at regional level was that Israel didn't disappear. Yes, suffered a lot, but was back on his feet. And Toulouse were the Hezbollah, Hamas, the Islamic Jihad. And at the end, Iran now has to defend itself. So the regional dynamic went completely the opposite way. So the Abrams Accords, that were becoming the weakest among the three regional projects by the three different powers, now they are going to have the best perspective. Why President Trump 2 days ago gave openly a speech in Washington saying, Mohammed bin Salman, that's enough. You have to join us. Because it's not only that Trump wants to defeat Iran or change the regime in Iran, he wants to build his own new Middle East. And to do this, he needs the Sunni states, starting with Saudi Arabia, to join his jewel, that are the Abrams Accord, because are his own, it's his project. And pay attention that this project has a lot to do with the Board of Peace. Because Board of Peace means that the US president is asking key countries of the global south to join him in rebuilding a corner, a forgotten corner, like the Strip of Gaza, together with the US. And who were the first countries that said yes to the Board of Peace? Indonesia, Turkey, Pakistan, Egypt, Kazakhstan. Now, these are key countries of the global south. These are the countries that China has been trying to enroll to his own international architecture, that may be the BRICS, the Economic Forum of the Global South, or the Organization of Cooperation of Shanghai, that is the strategic alliance for the Eurasia. Now, until the Board of Peace, these countries were actually working only with China. But on Gaza, they said, you know what? We want to sit at the table with Trump. Who knows what's going to happen? That was enough for Trump to say that he now has an opening inside the deepest problem of the Middle East, to work with these, let's say, pro-China countries, or supposedly pro-China countries. And what is the other piece of the mosaic that Trump is putting on the ground in Gaza? The idea to build an American base. It's not important if in this base we are going to have the Indonesian troops or the Qatari troops or the American troops. It's going to be an American base. And what President Trump is saying now about the Strait of Hormuz? He wants the Strait of Hormuz renamed by his own name. And he's speaking about taking over the Karg Island. Now, we don't know, of course, if he will actually do this. But the mindset, pay attention to this leap, is the same mindset that Theodore Roosevelt had towards the Caribbeans. So if there is an area of my interest, I need a war. At that time was the war against Spain. The result of the war has to allow me to build military presence of my own, my bases, my army on the ground. And on these small pillars, step by step, I transform then the Caribbeans and now the Middle East in my own backyard. So when Trump is saying, Galibaf, the president of the Iranian parliament, gave me a present of 20 tankers, and I'm very grateful to him, he's suggesting that he is a person to speak with in Tehran. He doesn't want to have a strong ally in Tehran. He just wants a person to work with in Tehran, because the aim is not to have a democracy in Tehran. The aim is to have Iran in his field. When he said, I want to own the Iranian oil, it's the same expression, it's the same sentence that he said on the Venezuelan oil. For the simple reason, because if you add the Persian oil, the Iranian oil, on top of the Venezuelan oil and on the Nigerian oil, because that's the other country that is coming closer and closer to the US, China will remain only with Russian oil. Yes, China is a big high-tech superpower. Yes, China may be winning in 10 years the race to artificial intelligence, but today China has a huge weakness. She needs oil. Without oil, the GDP of China is going to collapse. And from where comes the majority of the oil that China needs? Before was Venezuela, and now it's no more. Now is Iran. But if it will be no more, so the only source of oil for China will remain Russia. Now, you see how interconnected is the regional war against Iran and the global fight between US and China. Now, what are the question mark? Many more, and they are changing all the time, simply because we are in a transition situation. So we may describe the situation as we see it today, but may be completely different in 1 week from now. But are here some elements that may help us understand in which direction this big change, as Daniel Sobelman described, is going? Yes, there is no question, for instance, that Israel is coming out from this war as the biggest military power in the region. And there is also no question that Iran, even if the regime will somehow survive, it will be more isolated, surrounded by enemies, or countries like Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, even Turkey, not to say the Emirates and the Saudis, that are not trusting them anymore. So if Israel is rising and Iran is going down, in a new definition of regional power, what can next happen? Well, Turkey. Let's see who is the other actor that is trying to take any room possible anywhere in the region. Turkey is trying to build her own strategic projection, taking the place of Iran in the anti-Israel narrative, just to say, okay, they will fall, I will be there for them. The new challenge against Israel, strategic challenge against Israel, it will come from me. And Turkey means not the Shia, but the Muslim Brotherhood. A Muslim Brotherhood, as we all know, means not only Qatar, that is also, in energetic terms, a regional power, but means to be present in every single Sunni country with local organizations that are very active. You don't have only Hamas, you have Egypt, you have Jordan, and many others. And then you have Syria. And this is the last point before taking your question. Syria is a jewel in this new dimension of the Middle East. Why? Because there is no doubt that al-Shara became president thanks to Turkish helps, weapons, support, and so on and so on. No question that was a Turkish operation. But who was the country that pushed Trump to take the sanctions away? Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia wants Syria on her side, not on the Muslim Brotherhood side. And how is Syria behaving in this war against Iran? Syria is letting Israel using its own airspace. Syria is pushing or helping, or you choose the way to describe it, the Lebanese government to push the Hezbollah away. There were also several days, if not weeks, that there was the hypothesis, the perspective of a Syrian intervention in Lebanon to help the Lebanese government to push Hezbollah away. So, for whom Syria is playing? Is fully in the field of Turkey, or is responding to the interests of Mohammed bin Salman? And so maybe is one of the key factors of a new balance of power, first at all inside the Sunni world and then also in the region. So finally, what are we watching? This war between Israel and Iran we have to watch it very closely, because the implications are not only going to change the balance of power in Middle East, creating probably new actors, but also they are going to affect the global balance of power between China, Russia, and the US. What is the evidence, my last sentence of that? The behavior of President Putin. President Putin is using very harsh narrative to say that he's in favor of Iran. Iran is his own ally. He's defending the right of have a civil nuclear program, and so on and so on. Maybe he's also giving to Iran some key information to strike crucial military assets that US has on the ground in several countries. But there is a limit. He doesn't go too far. And whenever he can, he takes the call with Prime Minister Netanyahu and speaks with him about what's going on around in the region. And also speaks a lot with President Trump about what may happen in Iran. So for whom Putin is playing? He's playing from Iran? I don't believe it. Putin is playing from himself. And he understands that he can gain a lot from this reshaping of the Middle East. Also because the negotiations that are taking or may be taking place in Islamabad between Iran and the US are suggesting us that the solution, if really there will be a deal between the US and Iran, it will happen thanks to the closest ally of China. that is actually Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurizio. Thank you so much. I feel so small and little in front of this wide, huge scenario. And now, waiting for some questions, maybe in the chat. I saw that Daniel Sobelman was writing down some notes, so maybe he has already something to add or to say about what Maurizio said so far. As far as I'm concerned, I can put just two no questions, 2 points. One to Daniel Soberman about his presentation. How do you think that the jihadism how the jihadism can play in this scenario, in this situation, about the possibly or not regime changing in Iran and so. Is the jihadism ideology a real strong actor in this Middle East situation, or is waning, is fading away, or is beaten and weakened by the war? And to Maurizio, I would ask, where is Europe in all this changing and projects and different world that we are witnessing? I don't see questions in the chat, so if you like, Daniel or Maurizio, you can take again the floor.
Okay, sure. I can yeah, I can let Maurizio rest now for like 2 minutes now that he was done with his comments, which are really interesting. In fact, everything I was writing down was not comments, I was just writing down what he was saying because it's just so interesting. And in with respect to the the global,
we will put online the recording of this of this webinar, so we will go back to what you and Maurizio said. Thank you.
Yeah, so I would say, well, two things. Obviously, what is happening in Iran. So, what is at stake? I agree with everything that Mauricio said. What is at stake is more than the Middle East. I was focusing on the Middle East because that's, I guess, the most immediate and strategic environment is going to be reshaped, and it's for sure going to be reshaped. But obviously, if you know, 1 or 2 or 3 leagues above the Middle East is global, the global competition between superpowers, namely the United States and China. There's actually a debate that is going on for a few weeks now among international relations scholars, some of whom are already arguing that what we already are experiencing right now is technically a world war. Technically. Because what you have are 2 huge military conflagrations. One has been going on already for a few years, that's Russia, Ukraine, involving Russia. And the other now in the Middle East involving the United States, which is a superpower, and basically the entire region. This is a regional war. And what we're seeing is that there are beginning to be these linkages between these 2 conflicts, whether it's like Russia providing intelligence to the Iranians and the Ukrainians helping out the United States and others because they've become world-class experts in dealing with drones now that they are, and with the building drones and precision guidance and defending against drones. So Ukraine has become like a strategic lab, a laboratory that everybody is going to want to now draw on for their experience. So you're beginning to see these linkages between 2 massive wars that are going on, and massive and involving the United States and involving Russia. And now, as Maurizio noted, it goes another level, further, because it also involves China, because China, as we just heard, has a huge interest in the Middle East in terms of oil, specifically Iran, lost Venezuela, etc. So this is this is a very real situation that we're this is not some theoretical thing that is happening in some remote place on Earth. This is this is here, and this is a real situation with huge implications. Iran indeed had become in recent years part of a global axis that's been, I would say, past maybe 4 years. We began to see like articles discussing this, the emergence of a global axis that opposes the United States and the Western order, which obviously included China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, and its own proxy forces in the Middle East. So what is happening right now, just looking at this from this dimension only, already is impacting, will have an impact on global politics because Iran, as a member of that axis, is being very much weakened. So that's on the positive note. Obviously, the minute you've got interests of global superpowers that are fearing for their competitive advantage or their source of everything, basically, if it's oil, right, from the Middle East, then you begin, we're in uncharted territory, at least in our lifetimes. And it could spill over into a even bigger conflagration. So what I'm hoping is that, first of all, a semblance of a new order in the Middle East that would project perhaps stability upon the global order. Otherwise, we're in a situation where there's currently what we're seeing is a redistribution of power in the Middle East, but potentially beyond the Middle East. And when there's a redistribution of power and prestige and status and influence, and powers that used to be on the top of the hierarchy are now fearing that they are going to slip down a rung or two down that ladder. That in and of itself is a source of potential massive instability. So this is all stuff that we should be very cognizant of. And to your question, lastly, about you defined this as like jihadism or jihadi ideology. Um, I would use the term the resistance ideology, which is the idea. It's both an ideology that is espoused by the Iranians and the various resistance actors in the region who oppose. Well, first of all, they're all obviously this is the focus, and just using the term jihadi implies that what binds them together is religion. But that's not necessarily the case. It's obviously a huge dimension, but what binds them together is their aspiration for a new regional order in the Middle East, a new world order that is opposed to the United States, opposed to the West, opposed to anything that smells of imperialism and colonialism, etc. And what the question is whether this, when I say resistance, it is both an ideology, but it also came to represent an asymmetrical strategy. So when you say resistance in the Middle East, you mean an asymmetrical strategy with the rationale of dealing with far superior actors by deterring them, by establishing a certain red line and then chipping away slowly at the status quo, which was what the Iranians and Hezbollah that's what they were doing successfully until Hamas came and blew everything up on October 7th. So they had indeed been slowly shifting the balance of power in the Middle East and deterring Israel, deterring the United States. And now that axis of resistance has been dramatically weakened. The question is, and this remains to be seen, in terms of the the asymmetrical strategy itself, because we see that the strategy itself of weaker actors harnessing precision guidance, harnessing drones, using asymmetrical capabilities to amplify their power and punch above their weight. So the question is whether when this is all over, will the strategy itself be seen as more successful, less successful, right? Because Iran is now showing that with its obviously military inferiority, and can create a lot of damage in the region and in and globally. So that would be what I would look at, and I cannot predict where things are headed in that respect. And in terms of the ideology, again, after 1967, for instance, in the whole ideology of Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, that suffered a huge hit. Now, after what happened now, would resistance or jihadism or jihadi resistance, would that suffer the brand? Would the brand itself suffer a massive hit? I don't know. Well, that remains to be seen.
Thank you, Daniel. Uh, we have. I asked the question to Maurizio about Europe, but we have a listener who asks if he can speak and not write his question. But we have also a written question who is, we are seeing the end of the 7 October war. Who is controlling the time factor now, Iran or USA, Israel? This Bruno asks who is controlling the time pace, I understand, of the time factor in this war, Iran or its enemies. Joseph, I ask, be patient a little bit.
May I take the mic for a couple of minutes?
Couple of minutes? No, please,
Okay.
please, a brief and
Yes.
question
Yes,
to the
I
point.
shall be brief.
Okay,
First of all, I would
because
like to say hello to Maurizio and my congratulations to Daniel for the very, very interesting speech. Now, I shall throw a light briefly on one aspect which is also to be taken into consideration. We have been witnessing a couple of years ago the relationship between China and Russia, which was called as a friendship without limits. This is a friendship with limits because Russia is not so interested that China will become too strong, because in the 18th century, China lost to Russia huge territories of eastern Siberia, and considering that China is now in a period of revenge, because the 21st century for China is the century of revenge against the 19th century. It was for them the century of humiliation. In case China is becoming too strong, sooner or later that friendship is going to have limits, and the eastern part of Siberia, which is a huge territory, including Vladivostok, China will want it back. The staff of Putin is particularly worried about the China potential threat. And I would like to highlight that, to put that also on the chessboard. Thank you.
We can hear you, Marco. We can't hear you, Marco. You're mute.
Thank you. So, thank you, Joseph. And now there is another question. Thank you, Maurizio. Another question, a written question from Vito Albino, who asks a question to Director Molinari what about the internal US situation? I'm afraid it's a little bit out of topic, but is the Middle East situation politically sustainable for President Trump? So basically, he asks if or how the situation will influence the political situation inside the USA and the political and the stability of Trump. I understand. I don't see other questions. So
Sorry, Marco. We can read the question in the reverse order. I mean, what could be the impact of the internal situation in US about the Middle East?
Okay.
If it is sustainable, this situation, or is it not?
Thank you
Maybe a few weeks, yes. Maybe a few months, no. I don't know.
My problem is that either I listen to the speakers or I read the questions.
Yes, sorry.
I misunderstood. Thank you, Vito. And so I think that both Molinari and Sobelman could try to answer these questions. So
thank you, Marco, and thank you for the very interesting questions. I will take Europe and the time factor, leaving the crucial question raised by Joseph to Daniel. Europe was taken by surprise. Europe by the war in Iran, is deeply involved in Ukraine, doesn't want to be part of the war in the Gulf, but nevertheless, there are three elements that are suggesting us that something is happening. First, the European shield to defend Cyprus. The military ships sent by UK, France, Greece, Italy to defend Cyprus from missiles and drones, Iranians and Hezbollah, are creating the first attempt to have a common defense on the Eastern Mediterranean region. It never happened before. Yes, it is true that it's not a NATO decision. It is true that it's not a European Union decision. It's a decision that was taken by these four countries with the support of others, including Belgium, Holland, and also Spain. And the fact that this shield is built and is functioning, the reality is that today, as we speak, is defending not only Cyprus, but also Greece and also Sicily. So they don't announce it, they don't say it, but today, for one of the unpredictable consequences of this war, we have a common anti-missile shields built for the first time by a bunch of European countries outside the frame of the European Union. What may be the consequences? We have no idea. Second point, the Gulf means Hormuz. Yes, the Europeans don't want to be involved until the war is on, but they sign a text written by the French and by the British that basically saying the very same moment that the war will finish, we will be part of a joint operation to guarantee the freedom of navigation. 30 countries, most of the European countries. This means that in the immediately aftermath of the war, US could count on an important and crucial help by the Europeans on this very important ground that is the freedom of navigation. And the third element is what's happening inside Germany, because when Volkswagen is doing a deal with Rafael in changing a factory from car making business to a kind of possible European Iron Dome, the impact in the European business is going to be huge. So, yes, we don't have a European common defense. We don't have a European foreign policy. Yes, the Europeans are afraid from what is happening in the Gulf, but something very important is happening on the ground in Europe as a result of this war. Factor time is a fascinating question because it could be very easy to say the Iranians, I've been several times, I love that country, I have a great esteem for the way that they exercise diplomacy. It's a great civilization, they're very smart, and there is no question that in play chess, they, by the way, according to some sources, they invented chess. And in playing chess and using time, they may apparently be better than the US. But in this case, US is not US. In this case, US is Donald Trump. What is the main difference between Donald Trump and all the other US presidents? That he's a Majnun. He's completely crazy guy. He's unpredictable. So he's devastating. His behavior is devastating all the Middle Eastern actors and also the Chinese because they were so used by predictable Western leaders that now they have no idea what this guy has in mind. The fact that he changes his statements, positions twice or 3 days a day, is creating a situation where he is ruling the time. He is ruling the show. And all these guys in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, in Tehran, in Beijing, in Moscow, and maybe also in Jerusalem, they wonder what he's going to do in half an hour. So this means that the factor time, incredibly, but in this occasion, and I would say since Trump was elected the second time in the White House, is in the hand of the commander-in-chief. Now, what could be the consequences in the midterm elections? Huge. Because, yes, of course, if the Americans were going to vote today, the Republicans would lose the House and probably also the Senate. But if you pay attention to what the Majnun in the White House is saying every day, what is his narrative? What is he saying to his people? He is saying, you know what? We did Venezuela, we are doing Iran, and next is going to be Cuba. So he wants to go to the polls with Cuba, not Iran. And can you imagine if we'll be able to do Cuba during the summer? Yes, the Americans may be split on Iran. All of them agreed on topping down Maduro. But can you imagine Marco Rubio in Havana received as the winner of a new showdown by President Trump? So the narrative could be completely different from the one of today. So also in American political internal terms, we have to be very prudent because the approach that is an approach based on revolt, protest, unpredictability of President Trump may bring unpredictable results.
Thank you, Maurizio. Another question is Trump inventing a new way of making war? Maybe you already answered to it just now. Daniel, would you like to add something to answer?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. So in terms of the time, that's actually a really interesting question. It's a very important question because time is something that, especially in asymmetrical conflicts, whether it's the U.S. war in Vietnam or the 2006 war or basically any asymmetrical war, what we know from, like, conceptually, what we know from the literature, what we know from the book, like Mao Zedong literally wrote the book about confronting, about resisting a stronger power. And basically his argument was that once the stronger power storms you, then you as the weaker party, your challenge is to keep the war going for as long as possible. Because the rationale is that the stronger actor, being also the status quo actor, the status quo actor who whose population and constituency and political system wants predictability. It wants predictability in life. It wants like predictable markets. It wants to know that, right now I have no idea when I'm going to go back to teaching physically at the Hebrew University, right? So the most basic things that human beings and institutions and leaderships want is predictability and certainty. And he knows that, right? The weaker actor knows this, and that's his game. The weaker actor's game is to conduct a war of attrition that ultimately um, ultimately exhausts the stronger parties' political authority, political support, right? So if you think, for instance, about a war like the U.S. war in Vietnam, the United States lost about 58,000 troops. The Vietnamese lost about between 2 and 3 million people, right? And still the United States was perceived itself as having lost the war. And still the Vietnamese, who to this day, they don't even know how many millions they lost. They don't even, they feel that they won the war and are perceived to have won the war. So the time factor is, it's a very important factor that goes into this. So on the one hand, Israel after October 7th is not the same Israel. Because Israel's doctrine since forever, since the inception of the country, was wars have to be very quick. Because otherwise, the burden on society. I don't know how many of you are aware of this. This is open source, data, but most of Israel's pilots, for instance, who are now attacking Iran, they're reservists. They're like just normal people with lives and families and careers and children, etc. And that right now they're volunteering to conduct this war. So a country can't, a country that wants to be a normal, successful country that in the long term can't be in a constant war forever. Whereas the weaker side, time is on its side in many ways because it is fighting for its existence. All it needs to do is exist. That's the ultimate test for them. In terms of Trump, I agree with Maurizio. It's just he's like a completely different product. And he's unpredictable, obviously, and he's Trump. He's Trump. There's, what else is there to say? But the interesting thing is that on the one hand, he's perceived as being Majnun, as being crazy. On the other hand, he's very aware of that perception of him. And he uses that perception in a strategic way. So you never know as an outsider, as an analyst, as someone just wondering what the hell is going on in his head, you never know when it is like him being genuinely deranged or weird or bizarre or crazy. And when is it Donald Trump, who is now the more calculated and strategic decision maker and statesman? You never know because he has these two identities going on in his brain. And the very fact that he's aware that we believe that he's crazy, he's aware of this, he nurtures that perception and he uses it in a strategic way that ironically renders him rational and strategic. So that's what's really interesting about the guy. And he changes his mind, 3-4 times a day, like the latest tweet, he gives ultimatums and then the ultimatum passes and he gives an extension and then another extension and he's playing games. But time-wise, I still think that, first of all, the longer this war continues, then it's like World War I, which the main formative factor ultimately in World War I was just the duration of a war that everybody thought would end by Christmas, but lasted and lasted longer and longer, for 4 years. And that in and of itself brings in more actors, it brings in more technologies, that just time during war, everything is accelerated because war and fighting and friction creates knowledge, creates technology. Everything is accelerated because you have to be on top of your game, otherwise you won't have an advantage. So that's what's interesting about wars. They are very unpredictable in and of themselves the longer they last. And then, with respect to this war, I still think that Iran right now, given the fact that all that is expected of Iran from its point of view is just to stand on its feet when this is over. So, and a lot more is expected of the United States and Israel and etc. because they set out to, at the end of the day, they thought they were going to topple the regime. So the expectations of Israel and the United States are higher than what they are right now of Iran. Iran is just expected to survive and show that it's a strategic factor. And right now, I think that they are meeting those two criteria.
Thank you again. There is another question, and I think that we can take it as the last question. Okay. A question for Maurizio by Alberto Krakelmanikov. Which is the situation of the Iranian opposition forces against the Islamic Republic, the regime? Have you, Maurizio, some news about that?
I believe that one of the most important military action taken by the IDF was to bomb the SEPA bank. That is the most important Iranian bank, the bank that the regime uses, especially to pay salary. So it means that the 200,000 Pasdaran and the 1.5 million Basiji, they take their salaries that more or less are between $100 and $150 by the SEPA banks. Now, SEPA banks doesn't exist anymore. So if they go to take out their money to the bank, they will not find the circuit working. So this means that the regime will have to pay or through other banks, but it's going to be very complicated, or by cash. Now, to pay salaries cash to 2 million people, it's in time of war, it's very complicated. So, is it true that the opposition forces inside Iran are split, divided? They don't even exist as an organized opposition. But the difficulties of the regime with the time are going to accelerate, and it's going to be more and more difficult for whoever will be in charge in Tehran to hold the regime together. There is no question that Reza Pahlavi is very popular in the diaspora, and he's playing a crucial role in giving voice to these thousands and thousands of Iranians living abroad and asking for freedom. And this is very important. Maybe he's having an impact inside Iran, but it's very difficult to say how much he's popular inside. If I may say, just simply considering what I get personally, maybe it's just a small tussle, but I believe that Moussaoui, the Iranian leader that was jailed in 2009, in this moment may be the most popular figure among the opposition leaders. He belongs to the Shia clergy. He was a strong oppositor of Ahmadinejad. He was jailed in 2009. He's still there. So we have to wait. There is no question that most of the Iranians are peaceful people. They hate violence. But there is also no question that if a big change will come, again, according to my experience as a reporter, will come by the strength of the women, because the women of Iran are simply unstoppable. They are the backbone of the society. They are reclaiming their freedom. They are those that suffer the most. and they will be the main character on the stage when the regime will follow. Just one sentence to answer to the question of Joseph Oscar on China. Yes, I believe that there is a tough game between the US and China on Russia. I believe that Trump, inside himself, is doing to do anything possible to gain Putin trust, also at the expenses of Ukraine, simply because he wants to end up the taking over of the oil that China needs, and that, as we said before, the last missing piece for him is the Russian oil. But with all the respect to the President of the United States, when you see 15,000 North Korean soldiers fighting in Ukraine, this means that Xi told to Kim to send them, and Putin knows that they are not Koreans, but they are there because of China. And without those soldiers, he couldn't hold the front in Ukraine. So Putin is so much in the pocket of Xi that to change this, it's more than alliance. It's a relation of dependence that Putin has with Xi is going to be very, very difficult for Trump.
Thank you again, Maurizio. And if Daniel agrees, I think that we can go to the conclusion of this webinar. And okay, lastly, before closing, of course, I would like to thank really everybody. First of all, our speakers that were really, really impressive. The listeners, all of them who have been with us. The organizing associations, remember the Friends of the Hebrew University and the Italy-Israel Association of Milano. I would like to thank also Daniel Shriki, Director of the European Desk at the Hebrew University, who helped us in organizing, and my skillful assistant Luca. And I'd like to wish everyone Hag Sameach for both Easter and Pesach. And I think that we all we need badly these wishes of good, better times. Thank you again, and see you the next. I hope we'll have you in some next occasion. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you
so
very much. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.